Well, you know, I think I drank too much coffee. I'm got kind of the jitters a little bit, but I think I'll calm down. What a testament to have a daughter get up and say such lovely things to everyone about you. You're very lucky. This is a story that came to me from someone we all know about a man named Joseph that had an amazing coat that wore out. And so I didn't realize it when I was crafting it, that it was from a story that I had heard before. Annie West was the grandmother of my daughters. Now, Annie West was an amazing woman, but one thing she could really do is she could sew. Now, Annie sewed on a treadle sewing machine. Now, a treadle sewing machine is a sewing machine that has no electricity. You take the wheel and you push it and you take your foot at the same time. This belt goes around and the needle goes up and down, and it sews very slow. And Annie sewed on this treadle sewing machine. Now, this treadle sewing machine sat in the kitchen. It was an old-fashioned kitchen. When you entered through the door, the back door, the wall facing you was the sink, the stove, and the hot water tank. And right at the right angle, along the whole wall, was this treadle sewing machine. And then on this wall, you had the refrigerator, the back door, and a huge table that fed 10 family members every Sunday. On this wall over here, the south wall, were the cupboards and the countertop. This was a room that encompassed a big portion of Annie's life. Now, the treadle sewing machine was large, and it had a large base that you could lay out all of your sewing on it, and it would hold it. And what it held was the overalls, we called them, jeans we call them today, that she mended for her sons and her husband. Now, the ones that she mended for her son, when you pressed them, they had a strange odor. They smelled of rubber that wouldn't come out because her sons worked in the rubber factory. Now, in the box next to the sewing machine was a bunch of parachutes, white silk parachutes. She mended the parachutes from Lowry Air Force Base in Denver. When she'd get the big stack done, here would come a corporal or a private loaded up with another armload for her to repair these parachutes. This was her existence. And above, the most wonderful thing, above the sewing machine in this kitchen was a short little pipe. And it hung whatever project she was working on at that time. And I distinctly remember my favorite project, which was a water silk taffeta dress, fuchsia in color, that she was making for her daughter. It was a beautiful dress. It had velvet collar, velvet cuffs, tucking in the front, and gold little buttons, and a full skirt. This was to be her daughter's Christmas dress. Now, one day, one of Annie's friends came to her and they said, "I have a gift for you. I have a piece of cloth for you to make, for you to make." And this was a real treat for Annie because she was used to using flour sacks from the mill, Ronda cloth at 29 cents a yard, or once in a while she would go to the Goodwill or the Salvation Army and gather up all the old wool coats, bring them home and clean them up, tear them apart, and make something out of them. This was fawn colored, 100% virgin wool. She took that fabric and she laid it on the table that every Sunday fed 10 members of her family. And she walked around the table and she touched the fabric and she felt the fabric. And she enjoyed just in feeling the fabric and having it with her. She thought, what am I going to do with this fabric? What am I going to do? What am I going to make out of this? What is worthy of this? Just I know I'm going to make my good coat. In those days, we had our good coats and we had our everyday coats. And in a few years, our good coats became our everyday coats. She says, I will make my good coat. And she got out her big shears, big heavy industrial shears, and she went snip, snip, snip all around and cut out this coat. And she sat down to this treadle sewing machine and she started in. And the fabric pushed through the needle very carefully, and she watched to make sure the seams were straight. And Annie was in her element. Forgotten were the parachutes on the floor and the stack of overalls that needed mending. She was making a beautiful coat. Now Annie wore that coat. She wore it to church every Sunday. She wore it to the school board meeting that she went to every month. And she wore it to every other special place she went. And soon that coat started to wear out. The collar was frayed, the cuffs were frayed. And Annie brought it and said, I have to do something with this, but it's still fawn colored, 100% virgin wool. So she laid it down on this table that feeds 10 members of her family every Sunday. And she walked around and she felt it. She says, I'll make a jacket and I'll cut it shorter. And I'll flip the collars. And that day we didn't throw the collars away, we just turned them. And she turned the cuffs. And she says, what's left over, I'll put in the little bag and I'll make my daughter a muff or maybe a hat. And she got out her scissors and she went snip, snip, snip. And pretty soon Annie had a jacket. And she got in the button jar and she brought out a beautiful pearl button. And she put these mother of pearl buttons on this jacket. And Annie had a jacket that she wore to church every Sunday. And she wore it to the school board meeting each month. And she wore it to every other special place she went to. And you guessed it, it started to wear out. And she thought, what am I going to do with it? And she laid it down on the table. You know the table, the one that feeds 10 members of the family every Sunday. And she laid it there and she felt it. She says, I'll make a stole and I'll wear it over my good Sunday suit. And she did. And she cut it out with snip, snip, snip. And she sat at that sewing machine and she turned the seams over very carefully. And then she put the mother of pearl button on it and she wore it over her good suit. Wore it on church on Sunday, wore it to school board meeting every month, and she wore it to every other special place she went to. And pretty soon the stole started to wear. And she took it very gently and put it on that big table. You know the one. And she laid it out. And she thought, what can I do? What can I do that I will always have these memories with me? The memories of wearing the coat, the jacket, and the stole. And then she said, I know what I will do. And she went over to the glass button jar and she fished through the jar and she brought out one of those button forms, the kind that you cover. And she said, I know what to do. And she went over to her jewel box and she started digging through. She said, I know I have that pin or that little brooch in here, the one that the real colorful piece of glass had fallen out of, but she still kept. And then she found the back of it, the clasp. And she got out her scissors and the deed was done. She cut a perfect circle to cover that button. And she went and got the glue and she glued the back of that brooch onto that button. And then Annie took it with her and she says, I'll put it on my suit and I'll wear it every Sunday to church and I'll wear it to the monthly school board meeting and I'll wear it to every other special place I go. Now I have to tell you, Annie West was the grandmother of my daughters. And she could sew. And with this, she not only made beautiful things, but she made beautiful memories. And I want you to take my story as a memory and think of your mother and go tell it, but only tell it better.
Oh.